Hi, this is Shobhit Agarwal, your host for the webisode. I am the MD and CEO of ANAROCK Capital. Today, it's my honor to welcome two very special guests, both founder of their respective firms, Jeff Binswanger, founder managing director of Binswanger Group, and Anuj Puri, founder chairman of ANAROCK. Thank you, Jeff and Anuj, for joining us and all the panelists. Now I'd like to bring upon Anuj to talk about the genesis of his partnership and why now. Over to you, Anuj.
I'm absolutely delighted with this partnership with the Binswanger Group. I've known Jeff, his cousin David, his dad Frank for over 20 years. I have a huge amount of respect and a huge amount of comfort with this relationship. Binswanger has been in the business for over 90 years, and I know that the ability to translate those relationships into work has been beautiful through this history. Both Jeff and I, were partners of a UK-listed real estate consulting company. And by virtue of our respective partnership with that UK entity, we became friends. And we are this evening cementing that friendship into partnership. So thank you very much, Jeff, for forming this ANAROCK Binswanger. I think Shobhit asked the question is that why now of this partnership, and I think it's largely that we want to bring in the focus on the cross-border work between the Americas and India. And it's, really three simple reasons, during this pandemic to bring it. One, given the geopolitical situation between the US and China, and perhaps China with the rest of the world as well. We're seeing that a number of the US corporates are looking to outsource, and likewise many of the Indian corporates who had started to go for manufacturing into China are looking to outsource it other than China and perhaps to more sophisticated markets like the US. So that geopolitical situation post the pandemic, we believe is going to bring in a lot more cross-border work between India and America, who's been friends for a long time. We also think is that the government of India has understood that this is a big opportunity to attract the American manufacturing companies to India, and they're really rolling the red carpet. I mean, we've seen in the last 4 or 5 months a huge change in the policies, right from the labor reforms that they have done to the land acquisition, to the ability of the international companies to set up now businesses within 90 days of them stepping their foot in this country has been dramatic changes that we've seen, very proactive by the Indian government to welcome a lot of the international manufacturers to set up their facilities in India. And last but not the least, we're 1.3 billion people. So there is a very large domestic market, whether it's on the consumer durables or whether it's just as simple as we may call it as data centers, where India is amongst the world's cheapest mobile data offering country, and perhaps also the largest user of data, and we see a lot of data center work now getting into India. So that's where we thought that best-in-class two partners, given where the geopolitical situation is with the pandemic, it would be a great opportunity to cement our friendship into a much more formal working relationship. And hence, we decided that this was the best time to form this partnership of ANAROCK Binswanger. Jeff, it'll be lovely to hear comments from you on what's happening in the global market for industrial.
Well, first thing that's happening in the global market, the days you and I were together in Philadelphia, we were partying, dancing. We've never been able to have a party like that again. And now, 20 years later, I'm sitting in my attic, having this video conference around the world. My kids have taken over my offices because they've moved back to our home. And guess what? The world has changed. And I would like you to come back so that we can have fun again, because these are tough times that a lot of people around the world are going through. But we'll all get through it together. First of all, I want to thank ANAROCK, Anuj, Abid, and your entire team for putting this together. Your professionalism, your commitment to making this joint venture a success couldn't be more commended, and I want to thank you all. Anuj, this is about people. My grandfather is one of the most famous people in America in the real estate business and said this was always about people. It's about relationships, and relationship that you and I have had together over the years, and the business that we've done with companies like Motorola and 3M and setting up their operations in India and even British Air. But between you and me, I haven't been in a British airplane for the last 9 months. So it's hard to talk about British Air these days, but we've come together today with the idea that we can do something unique for real estate companies. But let's not kid each other. You have too many real estate companies talking to Indian companies, American, European corporations, and saying they can do everything for everyone, everywhere in the world. And the reality is none of us can in the real estate business. What we've done today by bringing the two of us together is created a unique niche in the industrial platform. It's a different business. Not many people understand it. You have to get your hands dirty when you go out in the middle of nowhere to be able to buy and sell and build plants. But that's what we did. And behind us, we created a consortium with one of the largest engineering companies called Excite, and also one of the largest liquidators of equipment in the world with liquidity. So together we offer real estate, engineering, and equipment expertise that's second to none to the major Indian companies, to the major US companies. And really, frankly, we do something very different. In America, we've been in business now for 90 years, but if you look where manufacturing distribution is, especially manufacturing, it's in small towns. And in small towns, you have to understand how to do business. If an Indian company is coming in, or a European company, or even a Latin America, you have to have relationships where the mayor, you better know, my daddy knows the mayor, my granddaddy knows his granddaddy, you better know everybody if you want to get things done in the United States when you start looking for manufacturing operations. And with 90 years of experience representing over 260 companies, we offer something quite unique, quite a unique niche to the industrial players. And thank goodness that the two of us are not in the retail office business. And that's not saying we don't do office. It's not saying that we can't do retail, but our niche today and what our focus has been is manufacturing and distribution. So today, what are the two key drivers we have to talk about? One is COVID and the vaccine, and the other one is the US elections. And frankly, anyone who says they're not in a survival mode in the US from the standpoint of running their business is not telling the truth. The answer is this is survival. Nobody knows if the COVID is coming back in the fall. Nobody knows if it's going to be a shutdown. And this has been a survival mode for everybody for the last 7 to 8 months of running a real estate company. And not only a real estate company, but also how corporations look at their real estate and how they're running their costs. So what is the key thing happening with COVID? Last night, I'm sitting home with my wife. We're watching TV with my son, sitting there. And what are we trying to do? We're trying to buy a new TV. And what happened the night before? We're trying to buy a new refrigerator. Then we said, should we buy a new, outside, mower for our grass to be cut? And what's happening is everybody is sitting at home. Everybody is going in line, and whether it's clothes or as recreational or whatever the things are, home goods, people are going in line and they are spending money like they've never spent before. And what it also means that no one realizes that you don't have to go out. You don't have to go to a store anymore, because everything you want, you can go online, you can probably get cheaper, you can get quicker, and it's delivered within the next day. So there's a whole shift right now, and what is happening is that people are going online and they expect it delivered. And we're going to have Jim Medbery in a minute talk about what that means and what's happening in the industry. But there are industries out there that are out running around that are doing very well right now. For example, food. In the grocery business, everybody, my parents are 90, 92 years old, they have their groceries delivered to them. And everywhere in the world right now, that's what's happening. You can have it delivered, you put your order in, and within an hour or two, things are delivered to your house. The life science industry, we're going to talk about from Jim Kilcourse, the Indian companies looking in to help solve the problem with COVID to find the vaccine, and we're seeing them looking in the US for manufacturing operations. You look at the tech industry, data centers, so hot right now because everybody's online in the cloud. But home goods, recreational, everything from the standpoint is very, very hot. And these businesses now, if they went through the first 2 or 3 months when they had to close stores or they had to realize their people weren't in the office, that they could survive. I talked to Wolverine Shoes the other day. Wolverine Shoes, one of the largest shoe companies in the world. They make Keds, Merrill shoes. And the chairman said to me, what I thought I was going to be able to do online in 5 years, I just did in 4 months. So the game is changing right now, and we have to be there to support it and make sure that we help corporations find and look at their distribution in the US and help them manufacturing around the world. Is there trouble? Yes. The automotive industry, trouble. Aerospace, trouble. Anything with the hotel and travel business, trouble. But the reality is, if you start looking at after automotive, parts, that is a positive business because people don't want to buy cars, but they'll fix their cars. So people need to make those parts. They need to manufacture, and they need to be able to distribute. So the corporate supply chain, which Jim will talk about, the standardization in the past is going to need flexibility in their systems, their relationships with their carriers, and their service to their customer base. So COVID, in my mind, is going to be another year. The vaccine might be in March, but I don't know about you. I don't want to be the first one to try it. Who knows what's going to happen, the first ones to try it. So you got to figure it's going to be another year. But online sales will continue to grow, and it'll start to be the norm. And if you look from the standpoint, if you look at a 5% increase in demand, you're talking about another 400 to 500 million square feet will need to be in the market. Number two is the elections. In 5 weeks right now, Mr. Trump is going to be up for re-election in the USA. And if you want to talk about turmoil, we're living in turmoil right now, and it can mean a lot to everybody around the world, whether he wins or he loses. If Trump wins, there's going to be exodus of manufacturing out of China, as Anuj just talked about, and it can easily come into Vietnam, Burma, and more importantly, India. And we have to be ready to help those companies go that direction. Also, from the standpoint, if he loses, there's going to be a transition problem. There's a racial injustice happening in the US right now, and who knows what's going to happen to the stock market. So it could really hurt the rest of the world. Bottom line, though, is we are today in the right sector. And for those who need help in their industrial and distribution, there's a great opportunity. And with what we've now created together, we can help corporations with their cross-bordering business. Yes, companies are reshoring, and companies are going to be nearshoring their production, which creates huge demand and opportunities for us all.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Fantastic overview and absolutely pertinent, every word that you said. With this, I'm going to pass it on to Shobit to unveil our joint report and then give a 5-minute synopsis of what is it in that report. Over to you, Shobit.
Thank you, Anuj. Thank you, Jeff. As part of the partnership, we are happy to release a report on India's industrial logistics digitally, given that we are currently placed in 2 different continents and perhaps 5 cities. This report gives a detailed insight of industrial roadmap as it gears up to become a global manufacturing hub. You may download this report from our websites, anarock.com and binswanger.com. Joining us today are 4 distinguished professionals. Steve Cassady, Senior Director of Procurement, Kimberly-Clark. Next speaker is Sanjeev Dasgupta, Executive Director and CEO, Ascendas Property Fund. Next speaker is James Medbery, Senior Vice President and Partner Retail Logistics Group at Binswanger. Our next speaker is Jim Kilcourse, Senior Vice President, Lifesciences at Binswanger. With this, I'd like to hand over to Anuj to moderate this panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shobit. I'm very excited to start the moderation of this panel. Steve, I'm going to start with you. I've got a couple of questions, and then I'm going to come to Sanjeev. After that, Steve, you've got a lot of global experience, and Kimberly-Clark is manufacturing across the globe, in over 30 countries. When you look at setting up a manufacturing base in a specific country, what are the key parameters that you sort of list down and say is, well, this now meets our criteria and we can go and set up a manufacturing base in that particular location?
Yeah, good evening, Anuj. It's great to be here and be part of this esteemed panel. I want to start with saying it's over 30 years that I've had feet on the ground in India with an early groundbreaking joint venture with Finolex Cable in Pune. Between that work with AT&T and fiber optic cable manufacturing, Finolex today remains one of the country's proudest cable manufacturers and distributors in the country. We had operations as AT&T in Bangalore and in Delhi, and in what's now Mumbai. At the time it was Bombay. Just a great country. And then I go fast forward a little bit, maybe 15 or 20 years to Kohler Company, where we were setting up operations, knowing the great potential of India, needing to have in-country manufacturing capability. And one of our most prominent vitreous factories is in the state of Gujarat, which at the time was the home of Governor Modi, who's now President Modi. And so I think that his foresight in promoting international business, the right labor incentives, electrical certainty with regard to power capabilities and gas supply capabilities, labor availability, all those things contributed to a facility that we found to be globally competitive, based right there in India.
Brilliant. Absolutely, Steve. And Steve, when you were looking at, say, Kimberly-Clark, and if Kimberly-Clark was to go and set up a manufacturing base in a new country, what are some of the criteria that you would look at?
Sure. So, it's a combination of factors, as you might imagine. There's got to be the right land acquisition costs and environment for that from a foreign entity standpoint. Can we have direct foreign ownership? Does it have to be through a partnership? What's the land structure of what we're looking to acquire? And for us, generally speaking, it's between 40 acres and 100 acres of land requirements for a suitable manufacturing or distribution site. Beyond that, then access to labor, sufficient labor capability. And then lastly, we're an energy intensive business. So having access to adequate gas supply, natural gas supply, as well as electricity. Those are some of the more critical items to at least identify or shortlist a site. On top of that, then comes transport and distribution capabilities for how we're going to get our products out to the marketplace. India being such a large country physically, you generally have a bit of a distributed network of warehouses that you're going to manufacture in one location, distribute to those warehouses, and then ultimately distribute to the end market consumer.
Absolutely correct. And Steve, because you've had the experience, the first-hand experience, you can speak with that conviction that we have a very distributed warehousing system. Otherwise, unlike in more mature markets, more international markets where there are large warehouses, then hopefully Sanjeev's company will be delivering very many large warehousing as they go on. My next question, Steve, to you is, we've been hearing this sort of term called as Industry 4.0, and it says global smart factories. These are like sort of connected factories, which means you make production wherever you want to make production, and yet the inventory is sort of pretty much controlled. Do you think that technology will increasingly continue to play a role within these global smart factories?
Oh, absolutely. It's pretty much front and center with our manufacturing strategy today, but it's not just the smart factories alone. I think that's maybe an important misnomer. Product companies, specifically branded manufacturing companies like Kimberly-Clark, have to get more intimate with their in-market consumers and use big data analytics, some artificial intelligence capabilities to drive their global and supply demand planning. Simplifying our product designs, less hardware, more software, and as you know, on top of the software, applications that consumers would use are essential. That gives you the flexibility to handle the fast-changing market. Adopting platform and component reuses, meaning that you want to have essentially like a hub and spoke manufacturing capability, and for almost 2 decades, many industries were chasing low-cost country sourcing was the term. So it was more of a labor arbitrage, if you will, to bring products from far away locations like China back to their home markets like the U.S. For us. That by and large, that gap is closing with regard to not only the cost to produce in labor and then transportation, but the risk that comes with it as well. Long supply chains. COVID kind of proved a point with regard to potential significant risks in border cross closings. So more and more these days, manufacturers are looking to manufacture in region for region, or more even specifically in country for country. And when it comes to smart manufacturing, you can't have a manufacturing plant of any scale in every country around the world. So you've got to have this kind of concept of a hub and spoke smart capability, meaning that it's got connectivity all the way down to the machine level. And then at that level, I'll use a philosophy of kind of the upside down pyramid, allowing our machine operators to be our key stakeholders and getting all the information that they need to produce the right product at the right time to serve those consumers in market.
Absolutely, Steve, and I completely agree with you. The trends are going to change. I mean, you've identified several trends in what you said, whether it was the low labor cost and working on labor arbitrage, hub and spoke, or manufacturing for the country, in the country. Yeah. What would you say, Steve, would be 1 or 2 trends that you're going to see post-COVID change on industrial than when we went into COVID?
Well, I think that there are 2 that stand out. One started well before COVID, and that was above and beyond all else. Sustainable practices are a must. And India specifically, water, access to water and being resourceful with water so that, during the drought periods that we're not taking that valuable resource from the general population and recycling, reusing, even minimizing water intake is a good example of sustainable practices in India. It's kind of ironic and funny because you have a monsoon season, but then we also have 3/4 of the year that's a drought. And but that's an example I think that happened pre-COVID and is going to continue in a lot of people's minds with the severity of natural disasters that are taking place and the frequency of them. That sustainable practices is essential. The other is, just like today's call, I think we've changed the way we do business probably forever. And that means, how do we gather and can complete our work, as I said earlier, about connecting with consumers. Digital technology all the way through the supply chain is going to be a new normal for doing business in the future.
Absolutely, Steve. Both are super trends, the sustainable practices and the way that we do business. Clearly we're seeing that emerge as well. And you're right, sustainability started even before we went into this pandemic. And, if anything, it will gain more momentum as we come out of this pandemic. Sanjeev, thank you very much for staying late in the evening. I know it's nearly 10 in the evening. Just 3 or 4 questions. You're one of the largest institutional investors, in industrial and other real estate asset classes, Ascendas, stroke capital land. And given your span of responsibility, I just want to understand, what are institutional investors thinking when they're looking to invest in India? And how can India compete even more aggressively with some of the other Asian countries to attract inward investment?
Thanks firstly, and congratulations on this fantastic partnership that both of you have set up. So I think Capitaland this is our 26th year in India. So we've paid our dues in terms of the learning that the hard landing and the learning that India generally provides foreign investors. But I must say that after the first 7-8 years of doing business, I think as we figured our way around, it's been actually a very profitable market for us. And that's the reason why we've been able to grow our business substantially. So primarily, I'd say for the first about almost 2 decades, we were focused on IT business parks, which are business parks catering to the technology sector. And about 5 years back, in fact, it's something which we were discussing at our board level, that what are the other asset classes we should look at. And industrial seemed to be an interesting opportunity. And one of the big changes that was being talked about at that point of time was the introduction of a national indirect tax across the entire country, GST. That did take almost 2-3 years to get implemented, but all credit to Modi for making that happen, because we know that was in progress even during the Congress government, but they just couldn't get it through. And that has genuinely changed the landscape of industrial in India. And that's the reason why, if you look at the last 3 years in particular, there's so much institutional investor interest in this asset class. What we found, when we were scoping out the landscape about 3-4 years ago, was there is not a lot of high quality or grade A industrial asset to buy in India. And the best way to grow into this business is actually to grow it organically through by being a developer. So we identified a local partner, coincidentally somebody who I have worked with earlier in my previous life, and is a pretty well experienced team. And we set up a platform about 3 years ago now. And we created a private equity fund wherein Capitaland and Temasek, which is a Singapore sovereign wealth fund, own approximately 50%. We own 51%, Temasek owns 49%. And in a relatively short span of time, in 3 years today, we have about 10 million square feet of industrial under development. Out of that, 2.5 million is completed, leased up, generating income. $600 million of capital already put to work, and we are now in the process of putting together a new pool of capital. So I do think that we, touch wood, we survived COVID. We hope that we'll have at least $1 billion business in India and industrial in the next 2 to 3 years. At least that's our aspiration. I think the challenges in India historically really have been, and I think Steve talked about this, and it's great to hear his experience about land acquisition, because that's typically been one of the biggest challenges in India. And I must say, I personally am really heartened to see, and one of the things which is interesting about India is it's only in moments of crisis that the government moves and makes certain landmark reforms. And I'm quite heartened by a couple of things that we are seeing in the last 7-8 months, right? One of them actually happened just before COVID hit India, which is a significant incentive package for the electronics industry. And the goal of that was to bring manufacturing of smartphones and various other ancillary electronics businesses into India from a manufacturing standpoint. And the second thing, we are now seeing states coming up with laws. I think earlier this week, the Karnataka government announced that people can buy agricultural land and they could use it for industrial purposes. I mean, now this in India, this is a landmark reform. I mean, this hasn't happened for the last 60 odd years of our existence, and that's actually, again, if I think is going to be a very big positive driver for industrial growth in India. If I think we can get the land acquisition streamlined, the market is there, and I think it's a large economy, getting more and more digitally savvy. So I do think that it could be a pretty promising outcome if we all can survive COVID.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Sanjeev, I would add to that we didn't talk about it much in my response, but to be agile in global manufacturing today, that hub and spoke model that I referred to, we now are driving our suppliers, the critical component suppliers, to be in closer and closer proximity to our own manufacturing. And to your point, having states in India open up that land availability not only makes it a potential for Kimberly-Clark, but also bringing those key suppliers into the country with us and being able to serve the market.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with both Sanjeev, you and Steve, that the government does well in crisis, and it is a little agile when the crisis hit, and it is true, Sanjeev, what you've said is our absolute true landmark announcements done by the government, and I genuinely feel as they're rolling down the red carpet to the industries to come in and set up their base for manufacturing in India. My next question, Sanjeev, to you is, what are the changes that you're seeing from some of the occupiers who lease your industrial facilities in their thought process during this pandemic period?
So I would probably, I think I'd break that up into two categories. I think on the logistics side, I think the e-commerce guys, as is obvious, have been expanding their footprint significantly. One of the interesting things that we're seeing is not just are they looking at the larger fulfillment centers, but they've also started looking at in-city, which is a new trend. And I think that is a trend which will grow in the next few years in particular. On the consumption side, which is the companies in the FMCG space, the likes of your Unilevers and Procter & Gamble's of this world, I think they historically used to operate from very low quality warehouses because that is what was available in the country. But now we are seeing a big pressure to move to compliant warehouses. And in a sense, actually, COVID is also accelerating that trend because they need to have much better health and safety standards in the logistics facilities. So I think that again is accelerating the push towards grade A. On the industrial side, I must say that actually we are now seeing more manufacturing targeting the Indian domestic market coming into India. On the electronic side, we're already seeing visible signs of, especially in certain sectors like smartphones, even television, screens and so on and so forth. And it looks like along with that, the component, I think the point which Steve was making earlier, the suppliers or the vendors to these companies are setting up shop. And for the vendors, interestingly enough, they are more interested, or they appear to be quite keen to explore ready-built factories because they often don't have a scale to go to the government and say, give me 100, 200 acres of land. Yeah. And neither do they want that hassle of setting it all up. So from that segment, we're seeing a lot of demand for RBF facilities.
And lastly, Sanjeev, Steve also mentioned about this sustainability. Are you seeing across the sort of Asia region sustainability gaining more importance within industrial and warehousing?
Definitely. I mean, for us, I would say that we are, making sure that we have solar energy on rooftops of most of the new warehouses that we're setting up. Mm-hmm. And I'd say that's actually across all our businesses. Today, even on the business park side in Bangalore, 75 to 80% of our power comes from solar, which is actually almost like 50 megawatts. So 50 megawatts of solar power every year. So renewable energy is a big focus. Water conservation, again, a big focus. I think our investors are asking us more and more. I mean, the parent company being listed, our shareholders want to know what we are doing on ESG, what's our ESG rating. And so it's a combination, I would say, of things that we want to do on the environmental front, and because combined with the push from the capital providers.
Super. James, I'm going to come to you. Jeff said in his opening remarks that he's going to be buying a new television, and prior to that a fridge, and prior to that a lawnmower. And we heard Sanjeev talk about the warehousing logistics, and one of the things that Sanjeev touched is this in-city warehousing, or you may call it as urban logistics. With e-commerce really gaining more momentum, James, would love to hear your thoughts, because I used to think is that warehousing is going to be all at the periphery of the city, and they're going to be not able to afford expensive real estate. Here we hear from Sanjeev that urban in-city warehousing is gaining more traction. Is that the case internationally as well?
It certainly is in the United States. The model is changing. Retailers are now looking at last mile facilities, so they want to be in town. You see companies like Amazon. It's kind of rumored right now that Amazon might actually buy Sears, which is a large American retailer. And the reason they're interested in buying Sears is for the real estate.
Oh my God.
Sears is anchored in malls all throughout America, and they have struggled as a retailer. But Amazon is looking at potentially buying that and using those big in-town stores as last mile distribution facilities. We're also seeing companies like Macy's, which is another large American retailer. They are currently doing last mile out of their existing stores. So, if you go online, their online sales 5 years ago were about 5% of their total revenue. Now it's 35%.
Wow.
5 years, yeah. So it's amazing what's happening. And what they're doing is, if you go online to Macy's and you order a jacket or a sweater or electronics or anything that they sell, they will more than likely ship that from one of their stores in the area where you are, rather than from their e-commerce facilities, which are scattered throughout the country, because they're looking at the cost of transportation and shipping. And if it's in stock in one of the stores, within 10 miles of your home, that's where they're going to ship it from, is the store, not from their e-commerce facility. So it's definitely changing. Amazon this year will be opening 100 new facilities. About a third of those, or 33, are typical large DCs, which are 1,200,000 square feet, and they may have 1,500 employees in each facility. And during the holiday season in December, they go up to 3,000 employees. So they have to have large, it's amazing. They have to have large sites in order to accommodate parking, and they bring people in by buses, what have you. But so that's a third of the new facilities that they're going to be opening in 2021 or 2021. The other 2/3, or roughly 66 facilities are last mile in town centers, which are smaller, much smaller facilities. But it puts their footprint on a bigger scale where they can get you the thing. I mean, I just ordered something from Amazon last night, and I just looked out this morning in my garage, and the package was sitting there. So,
Wow.
yeah. So that's what's going on in distribution. The other thing that we're seeing here in the U.S. right now is manufacturing is coming back from China. We have a lot of our pharmaceutical precursors which are made in China. I see those probably going to India or back here. We want to operate. I think people want to operate in democratically controlled countries now. We've kind of had it with China through this COVID. So it's rather interesting to see. We sell a lot of manufacturing plants in the U.S. Binswanger does, and we have two large manufacturing facilities that just came available in the Midwest. One in Indiana, one in Kentucky, and neither one of those properties was on the market for more than a few months before we had buyers for them. And these are facilities that are almost 1 million square feet. So we are very fortunate that we are in the industrial-oriented business. We do lots of things at Binswanger, but we're well known for industrial work, and it's the only segment of the commercial real estate market in the United States that's actually doing well. Retailers are getting killed in bricks and mortar, but they are still needing warehouse space because their online sales have increased, and as a result of that, they can't fulfill e-commerce orders out of their existing store supply chain facilities because it's a whole different operations, different machinery, different material handling equipment, and so they don't seem to work. Store supply and e-commerce don't fit in the same building. So we're seeing a lot of activity in the market for e-commerce facilities right now through all of the retailers. Their store sales are way down, their e-commerce sales are way up. So it's a good time to be in our business here in the U.S. right now.
Absolutely. And then James, did you see this trend even before the pandemic, or is it that the pandemic has sort of accelerated it manyfold?
Well, we certainly saw growth in e-commerce fulfillment long before the COVID problem hit. And typically those e-commerce facilities are centered around metropolitan areas that have great air freight capacities. Louisville, Kentucky, Memphis, Tennessee, Indianapolis, Indiana, where UPS and FedEx have large hubs and you can get, same day service. So that's been continuing to be a good business for the last few years, but it definitely is, we've seen a surge since COVID. People are shopping online. People are not going out. You get as Jeff said earlier, you can get your groceries delivered to your house. You can get anything you want delivered to your house and get it within a day or two. And that's where we see the e-commerce locating around these air hubs. Because for instance, in Louisville, which is UPS's worldwide air hub, you can order something at 11 o'clock at night and have it at your house the next morning at 8 o'clock.
Amazing, huh? Fantastic.
Yeah, so it's changed the way that we look at online product.
And James, are there any challenges? I know this is great from an industrial perspective and warehousing, the opportunity that's throwing up for the real estate, but are there any immediate challenges as well that you are seeing?
Well, there's, labor is always an issue. Prior to COVID, the unemployment rate in the United States was as low as it's been in my lifetime. And I'm 61 years old. So labor is always an issue. And particularly when if you're an Amazon or one of these other large online retailers that have high employment requirements in these facilities, you're competing. So we've seen wages go up. But typically, that we don't see any issues so much with industrial. There's plenty of land outside of these metropolitan areas. They don't have to be in city. So most of the distribution facilities are located in industrial parks on the outskirts of these major metropolitan areas. and some are, in small towns in the middle of nowhere, but they're right in the middle of where the target transportation is for these companies. So, we're seeing a lot of issues in other segments of the real estate industry. Retail's getting crushed. Offices, we don't know what's going to happen with office, but I think what you're seeing right now in the U.S. anyway is that there's a lot of big corporate companies like Steve at Kimberly-Clark that have a huge footprint of space around the country, office space, and people are working from home the last 6 months, and they're doing fine. And so I think companies are going to start looking at their corporate real estate footprint and their occupancy costs, and maybe reevaluate and go to shared office space where people are working a couple days at home, a couple days at the office, and so they need a smaller footprint and less occupancy costs on a national basis. So that's kind of what we're envisioning.
Jim, how about availability? Because now everybody seems to be looking in the same markets for the same product. How about the availability of major distribution? Is it there? And if it's not there, how long does it take for somebody to really find the space, build it, and get themselves up and running? Because the need is now.
Well, in most of the major distribution markets, there is availability. Developers typically bank land, and so there's land available. People are building spec. We're seeing most of the distribution markets. It depends on the size, but for instance, I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, which is a market of about 1 billion square feet of industrial space. And if somebody was in this market today looking for 1 million square feet, there's 6 buildings available that could accommodate that. And if you're looking for 200,000 square feet, there's probably 30 or 40 buildings available. So there is available space, but the absorption rate is going up, but people keep building. So we don't see a shortage of available opportunities at this point.
Super. Now, this is heartening to note. Jim, thank you for your patience. You are a guru of life sciences. I have 3 questions for you, Jim. One is just a continuation of what James said on the warehousing. Is refrigerated warehousing a big part of the business for the life sciences?
Yeah, it's actually going to be an increasingly significant component. Most of these vaccines that are being developed for COVID require -20 to -80 C storage, and that's a pretty significant change from 2 to 8 C, which most of the biologics are stored at in the U.S., even some of the IV bags. So we foresee a pretty significant uptick in really high-tech, cold chain warehousing and distribution centers as a result of COVID. And the challenge will be, can they be produced fast enough to meet the demand of 300-400 million doses of a vaccine? And the question is whether or not those vaccines need to be re-administered semi-annually, annually. None of that information is known, so companies are starting to think through how they're going to deal with it.
But
-20 and -80 is a pretty significant challenge, not only from the warehousing, but how to get it from the warehouse to a remote hospital in the middle of Arkansas with these cold chain trucks and so on. So a lot of changes coming to support that.
And then, Jim, look, US is still very mature, very advanced. Some of the emerging markets, this is going to be a real problem that they're going to get faced with refrigerated warehousing and -20, -80 C. And not only that, from there to actually going to the hospital, where the guys are going to get vaccinated. I'm not so sure that transportation is going to be equipped to be able to take that vaccine. This is going to be a real challenge. I don't think many of us have really applied ourselves through that.
Yeah, it's going to be definitely a technical challenge. I think that emerging countries will have challenges with just how to handle and ensure that the drugs maintain temperature, because a lot of these vaccines can't tolerate freeze-thaw cycles and stay effective. And so it's one thing to be able to say you can store it, but you have to guarantee it maintains that temperature, till it gets to a hospital and they start thawing it. So a lot of challenges.
Yes, absolutely. My second question is, Jim, we're seeing that, US is providing increased incentive for localization, of production for the life sciences, for the pharmaceutical. Does it mean that the US companies will perhaps bring back manufacturing? I think James referred to that from places like China to the US. And does it also mean, Jim, and India is big on this pharma, does it also mean that many of the Indian companies who are selling drugs in the US may need to actually set up a manufacturing facility in the US if they have to take advantage of the incentive of localization?
Yeah, great questions. I might start with, the US currently has incentives, but the majority of them are state-funded incentives. And what we see, at least on the drug and pharmaceutical equipment side, is that the incentives aren't capable of offsetting labor cost of India and China. So it's typically a competition within the U.S. If you've decided you're coming to the U.S., which state will give you the most incentives? And there are 4 or 5 states that are always on the list. Well, the U.S. government has sort of been caught with a pretty significant challenge on supply chain for everything from Tylenol to propofol, which is important for intubating patients, COVID patients going on ventilators. It's what they use for surgery. Ventilators themselves, simple things like the personal protective equipment, like the N95 mask and the face shields and whatnot for healthcare workers. So the U.S. legislation has put forth several pieces of legislation to onshore or nearshore the manufacturing of U.S. supply chain. And they've identified there's probably about 50 drugs that they have on the shortage list. Many of them are made, or a large portion of them are made in China and India. The government believes it's a threat to U.S. security to not be able to supply the drugs, and so they said, we're going to issue these executive orders and bring all manufacturing back to the U.S. Well, conversely, PhRMA, which is the drug industry lobbying organization, is pushing back because it's just not practical. The cost would be hundreds of billions of dollars, and the increase in purchasing price just because of the labor rate alone would make this a non-starter. So the reality is something in the middle is happening, and the government's already issued several $1 billion worth of grants or low interest loans. Some of them are even being offered zero interest loans with the ability to even forgive the loan at some point. And what that's doing is encouraging the U.S. Demand to be produced in the U.S. And so we've seen some activity with a lot of the generics certainly are made in India and China, and it will create an environment to be competitive by producing it in the U.S. to help offset the difference of labor. But the challenge is how to spend tens of billions of dollars quickly to be able to address the COVID impact. The good thing is most of the drugs that they're talking about are well known and very stable. The vaccine, the jury's still out on what that manufacturing is going to look like. I think there are about 4 companies in the U.S. all competing to get there first, but I agree with Jeff. I won't be the first one in line. I might be the third person in line, but I certainly won't be the first. So there is I think a strong push, and I think it's going to survive a regime change in both the White House and Congress to to reduce the risk of supply chain for the entire healthcare stream. They've incentivized, I think Ford or GM were actually making ventilators. So the government has special access to funds to retool plants to make ventilators. And so we're seeing a lot of that activity going on and expect that to continue. But what's interesting is that there was an immediate reaction that this could, really do damage to the economies in India or China. But the demand for drugs has gone up so much, most companies can't meet the demand.
That's right.
Some companies we've talked to, they have 140% demand against their capacity, and they just can't. They have to short somebody's market, and that's a tough choice to make.
Jim, my final question for this evening to you. What's that one trend that you think is going to change for the life sciences business as we come out of the COVID regime?
There is a very different approach to solving the problem. So one example is Amgen and Eli Lilly are partnering Eli Lilly is discovering the drug and Amgen has capacity, so they're going to manufacture the drug. Those are very non-traditional relationships in the drug industry, because the profit comes from both sides of those, and the companies want both pieces. And so we see that as a sustainable trend, is leveraging the network that exists. I was talking to Merck last night, and they're willing to consider any excess capacity out there that could increase their speed to market. And so we think the non-traditional relationships are going to change quite a bit.
Yeah, this is fantastic, Jim. I can go on and on and on. I mean, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I know we've run out of time. I'll try and quickly summarize and then hand it over to Jeff for any final words. Clearly, Steve, you said is that sustainability is going to be very important. Sanjeev seconded that. Renewable energy, water conservation. I think the way that we do business, again, Steve, I completely agree. It's going to be a lot more dependent on digital. Because that's how you're going to be accessing the customers. Businesses will need to be very agile. Sanjeev, I like the way that you express that government does well, particularly the Indian government does well when in crisis, and we've seen it. This time they've done a fantastic job of this, and clearly on the logistics side, both you and James said is that in-city warehousing is going to become more popular, and clearly affordability is not that big an issue given the demand for speedy delivery. On the challenges, I think James, you were clear that labor was a challenge, is a challenge, and particularly within the pandemic will continue to remain a big challenge. But other than that, you felt is that on the industrial, we didn't have many challenges, particularly in the US, but certainly retail, office, and some of the other asset classes, including hospitality, we would have big challenges on that. I'm glad that I'm not moderating one of those panels. Jim, loved your comments on the refrigerated warehousing. And, it is clear that we need to be forward thinking on how the vaccine is going to be transported and stored. And that could be possibly a very large opportunity for countries like India, where there is 1.3 billion people who will ultimately need to get vaccinated. Your interesting thoughts on onshore, nearshore, where you feel is that we'll have to perhaps find a middle way. Somewhere it's not that easy just to bring back the manufacturing from some of the low cost countries. And love the way, Jim, that you said is non-traditional relationships are going to be sustainable. And we're finding that in every business where, even the arch rivals, they're coming together. And you summarized it beautiful that the non-traditional relationships have happened, and perhaps even after the COVID era, they will remain sustainable. I've thoroughly enjoyed moderating it. Phenomenal. Thank you very much. I'm going to pass it on to Jeff for his final comments.
Well, Anuj, I will tell you, if the real estate industry does not work out, CNN does need a new broadcaster. I'd like to also thank Steve Cassady, one of the great, corporate real estate minds. This guy is a superstar, and for joining us today and giving your input, Steve, thank you very much. And Sanjeev, we expect to start filling your buildings, so it's time for us to go to work. I want you to know
Absolutely, yeah. We look forward to that.
Do that. And thank you for staying up so late, all of you. Anuj, Shobit, and your entire team, terrific job, very professional. And I think hopefully a lot of people get a chance to see the opportunities that are happening in this industrial sector, because this world is going to change very quickly. And in the next, not only 5 weeks, but in the next year and a half, it's going to be bumpy. It's going to be interesting. But there's great opportunity to do a lot of business, not only together, but to support a lot of corporations like Kimberly-Clark. I want to thank you. I want to wish everybody to be safe in this crazy time, but great job, and thank you very much for letting us join you today.